Welcome back to the Run Radio podcast. My name is Trina Wilcox. My guest today, Kelle Sparta, the spirit doctor. And I was looking over your bio and some of your information, and I think you're just the person I need to talk to today. So welcome.
Oh, I'm excited.
Well, I had been reading a book, and actually it was a book from this one author, and she had a couple that she had written, and I was kind of on board. I overlooked a couple woo-woo things, as you will be talking about, and then a few more just were taking away from my focus of the book, and I couldn't relate to reality with this. It was so far out there on some of the recommendations and suggestions. And so I'm turning to you for that advice and balance on how to move forward and make progress when you feel stagnant or you're just kind of stuck in a place where you're ready for that growth, but it doesn't feel like you feel like you're kind of tricking yourself into believing things that just aren't a reality.
Okay. All right. So great question. All right. So when we get stuck, there's a reason. Okay. Let's start with that. So getting stuck is usually a function of either resistance or a limiting belief that we have not looked at, acknowledged. It may even be as you get further into your journey. In the beginning of your journey, it's almost always a limiting belief. But as you get further into your journey and it gets harder and harder to see what's in the way because you've dealt with all the obvious stuff, then it becomes a limiting assumption. And assumptions are more insidious because we don't question our assumptions very often, right? Like we don't think, oh, I might get out of bed this morning and float up off the floor because gravity might not work, right?
Right.
That's the level of assumption that I'm talking about, is we just assume gravity's going to work, right? And so, it can be one of those three things: a resistance, a limiting belief, or a limiting assumption. Okay. And so resistance is when you're trying to grow, right? You are looking at the next stage of your personal evolution. Okay. And that next stage of your personal evolution requires you to be someone new.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you keep that in mind, that makes the resistance make a lot more sense, because we can't, the person we are is the person who creates our current reality. If we want a different reality, then we have to become the person who creates that different reality. Okay. And that reality is based upon our assumptions, our beliefs, our expectations, our intentions, the things that we put out there, and what we believe of ourselves, which is more crucial than any of the other pieces, right? Because if we think, I don't deserve, I can't have, I don't believe, I'm not good enough, I'm not confident enough, blah, 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 right? All of the things, then we can't step into that new reality. Now, what you have to understand is that our ego, our personality, has a survival mechanism. And that survival mechanism says, I don't want to die. Because when you become someone new, the old you dies. Right? This is what in shamanism we refer to as the shamanic death. It's the death of the ego, the death of the old personality, and the stepping into the new beingness, right? And so your ego will you'll be like, I'm going through this door, and your ego will plant their feet in their hands and go, no, don't want to go, right? And so that's where resistance comes into play. And each of us has our own form of resistance. That's sort of our common thing. But, avoidance is one of them. And, choosing comfort over change is another one. And when I say comfort, I don't mean like I'm happy here. I mean, I'm familiar here, right? I know what to expect here, right? Comfort is not actually, it's a terrible phrase, comfort zone, because people are like, oh, well, you're comfortable here. No, you're used to it here. There's a difference. Comfortable is a different thing. And so, your resistances kick in. And so the resistances all have their own little pieces and parts that you have to address. And that's a lot. And, it'd probably be an entire show. But the resistances have to be overcome in order to step into that new reality. Sometimes it's just a matter of looking at your ego and going, I am going here. You need to get on board or get run over. Right. It's like, right. So, and sometimes it's that simple. And about 70% of the time, it's that simple just so you know. That's the
Mhm.
avoidance resistance. And so
Mhm.
about 70% of the time, that's what you're dealing with. The other ones can be a little more complex, but the limiting belief can, you're like, oh, I want to, let's use it. So my recent thing was in January. I got a reading that said I'm going to be a household name by the end of the year. And I went, I never wanted to be famous. Oh.
Ah,
My body went, what? Right. And so I had a lot of inner resistance show up around
right.
that. Right.
Right.
And so, for me, the work has been around letting go of my fears and expectations around what fame means. Right.
Mhm.
And deconstructing what it, so, because to me, fame meant a loss of freedom, and freedom is my top value. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you're fighting against your top value, you're like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do this," right? So
Right.
what I had to do was deconstruct that expectation. And, when you intend to do these things, the universe sets out to help you.
Mhm.
And so in my instance, the universe sent Neil Donald Walsh to come onto my podcast. So I got to talk to him about being famous and what that was like.
Uh-huh.
And then it also sent John Rice Davies, who was Gimli in The Lord of the Rings, right? He was like, you want to talk
Nice.
famous, right?
Right.
He showed up in my tiny little town of Boquete, Panama, 25,000 people. And he just showed up in town and was like signing pictures and taking pictures with people. And so I got to talk to him and his daughter for about 20 minutes about what their life was like. And I was like, oh, I don't have to give up my freedom. Look at
Mhm.
that. And so, that helped to deconstruct that limiting belief that was holding me back from allowing that energy to flow into my life.
Oh, neat.
Okay. So
Mhm.
that sort of thing is
Mhm.
another piece that you can go through. And then the third piece is the limiting assumption. And the assumptions can be a little more difficult because, again, they're not obvious. And so an assumption might be something like, I can't be seen or I'll be killed for my gifts because in a past life or many past lives I was, right?
Okay.
That can be, it is a belief, but oftentimes it's so not conscious that it's actually an assumption. Okay. So, especially things that get pulled forward from past lives, those can often be stitched in under the conscious radar, which makes them an assumption rather than a belief. Okay.
Okay.
So those sorts of things, helping to identify where the belief came from, where that
Mhm.
assumption came from, can be super helpful for letting it go, right? You have to get something up to consciousness before you can shift it.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay. Did that help your
A
answer?
little bit, yeah. I
Okay.
wanna know though, let's go back to you, get back to you. Like, how did you even start into this world of work? I mean, it's was it just wanting to be better on your own, help others? How did this manifest?
Yeah. So my mother said I was talking to ghosts in my crib.
Oh, really?
And she had been psychic in her youth and it had scared her and she shut it down. And she
Okay.
never figured out how to open it back up again. And she was absolutely committed to that not happening to me. And so my entire childhood with that belief from her plus her divorce, which happened when I was 5, and she went straight into all the personal growth stuff at that point, and I was her partner in life. So, whatever mom did, I did. And so from the time I was 5 years old, we were doing Seth and Ram Dass and Abraham Hicks and JC Knight and, all the things and all of the spiritual stuff. So I was doing self hypnosis by the time I was 10. I was reading tarot cards by the time I was 12. She sent me to psychic development classes, you name it, I did it.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
even remember all the stuff we studied because, she would take all the we were avid readers. And so we'd read all these books and then I don't know if you're old enough to remember, you don't look like you are, but there used to be the time where you would cut the page out of the back of the book that said, send this in to sign up for a class or to get a
Yeah.
tape series. And so we would mail those out and wait for them to come in the mail and listen to these cassette tapes on all of this stuff.
Oh,
And so, this isn't what I do, it's who I am at this point. I actually have high school yearbook signatures that read like client testimonials. It's a little terrifying.
so well, at least you knew where you were going.
Yeah.
I think that can be a struggle for so many of us. Like we just don't know, and getting on that path has been a struggle. What in your growth and on your path has been a struggle for you? Did you ever think, hey, no, this is not the right direction and you needed to reroute? Or what was all that like since you started so young?
Yeah, well, so, we all go through our rebellious phase. I I met a man when I was 20, and he was a Navy officer, and we met and got married within 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And so say I was 21 and stupid. So, um, but we got married, and he was an atheist, and so I basically dropped all my spiritual stuff for the entire time we were married. And then when I can actually tell you exactly the moment where it rolled back around again. Oddly, it was a knock on the door from a fundamentalist minister down the street, with a fervent new convert of his who came to the door. And he said, what do you believe about God? And I'm like, you don't want to know what I believe, because, I was raised. So, in addition to all of the stuff my mom had me in, she said, I'm not going to go to church with you, but if you want to go to church youth group with your friends or whatever, you're welcome to do that. And we moved a lot. And so I did a lot of church, because she was military. And so I did a lot of church youth groups. So I was raised in the Catholic Church, or not, well, not the Catholic, the Christian church,
Right.
in relation to, and all the different iterations of it, in addition to all the stuff that we were studying at home. And so I speak fluent Bible, right? And so this guy came to my door and he's like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that, because I've read the Bible, and, I'm taking all of my beliefs and associating them. But I warned him, I said, look, I'll have this conversation with you, but at the end of this, your guy who's with you here is going to have a crisis of faith. And he's like, let me worry about him. Okay. And so we sat on the stoop of my door, because I
Wow.
couldn't invite him in because my husband was an atheist. So we couldn't have the conversation in my living
Right.
room. And so, for 2.5 hours, we had this amazing spiritual conversation. And at the end, he and I parted friends because he was actually a reasonable human. And his convert was having a crisis of faith. I'm like, I did warn you. He's like, it's fine. I got it. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but we had this lovely conversation, and it woke me back up into I really do believe it was a sacred contract that we had for him to come and knock on my door and have that conversation that day, because it really did get me back on the track. And I went and I ended up signing up for a class that took me to a Reiki certification. And then I ended up doing a Shiatsu certification, and it all just sort of brought me back on track. And shortly thereafter, I asked for a divorce from my husband,
Mm.
and because I woke up and I looked at my life and I had done the American dream. I
Yeah.
had done the checklist. I had the successful business. I was a pillar of my community. I was president of a Habitat for Humanity affiliate. I had a gorgeous husband, a big house, the dog, the 2 cars. Thank God we didn't have children. Um, but from the outside, my life looked
Yeah.
incredibly successful, and
Right.
inside, I was miserable. I mean, my husband and I had been in a Cold War for power struggle for years, and even the dog didn't like me. Like,
Oh, oh,
the
then
dog
there's a
the dog
problem.
wanted to be my husband's partner, not
Oh
me,
my
right? So,
goodness.
but yeah, I mean, I burned out on my job. I was burned out on the nonprofit. I was just done.
Yeah.
And so I leveled my life. I just got rid of it all.
And
I
how old are you at this point?
28, my first
Okay. Oh,
Saturn
wow.
return.
Do what?
My first Saturn return, my
Oh,
quarter
okay.
life crisis, right?
I mean, yeah, and that's
Yeah.
that's heavy. That's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, it was a lot, and I dumped it all. I bought a little house, and shortly thereafter, I ended up back at the Renaissance Fair where I had worked back when I was in college. And shortly thereafter, I met a bunch of people who were Rennies, and I ended up moving in with them in Massachusetts. I was in Connecticut when I met them. And it turns out they were all shamans and witches and spiritual folk. And I ended up living in what we affectionately referred to as the magical house for the next 4 years,
Uh-huh.
doing deep dive work on myself and being held in community, which was beautiful. It was the first time I really felt fully supported in community. And so it was lovely. Yeah.
Um, wow. And how long were you in that community?
4 years. The
All right.
community split apart shortly after I left, and I thought I was moving, And the universe was like, nope, we're not going to let you get approved for any apartment or any house or any roommate situation you apply to. And I applied to a lot.
Yeah.
And I finally was like, okay, I'm just going to go to this festival. And they're like, yeah, that's good. Get rid of everything you own because you're not coming back to it anytime soon. And I was like, okay. And
Okay.
so I had scheduled my giveaway of all my stuff. Anything that didn't fit in my car got given away because I was already homeless at this point. I was living in different people's houses every night of the week. I had a teaching circle I was running, and each of my students was putting me up one night of the week for like 6 months because I couldn't find any place to live. And
Wait, how at this point, how do you resolve going from, full-time, 9 to 5? Why? I mean, I feel like you could have walked in and got any job that you wanted, or at least something where you wouldn't have been homeless. What was happening that you were okay with not doing that?
it wasn't that I didn't have a job.
Okay.
I did. I had income coming in.
Oh, okay.
I just had no place to live. I could not
Wow.
get an
Right.
apartment to approve me or get a roommate situation to approve me. I could not. The universe would not allow it.
Wow.
And so, I was just so there's a term called walkabout that's often used in Australia, right?
Okay.
And
Oh.
it's the process of walking out into the world until you find yourself, right?
Mhm.
And the universe was like, no, you are not going to get settled down again. You are not going to get stable again because you need to go on walkabout. And so I didn't know what that meant. And during the 3 months that I couldn't find a place to live, I found out from a woman at a store what walkabout meant.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, whatever. That's nice. Right.
Sure, sure, sure.
Sure. Right. And and then shortly thereafter, the job that I was working, the business closed.
Oh.
And so talking spiritual eviction, right? It's
Wow.
like, and so the business closed. And so now I'm on unemployment insurance, right? And I'm working part-time for a medium, trying to make ends meet. And then my car gets broken into and they steal my laptop. Now the laptop had been something that had been gifted to me by somebody who was a tech guru, right? And
Right.
so, he had bought top of the line when he bought it years before. It was worth about $50 at the time. But, years before he had bought very top of the line. Well, my insurance covers replacement value. And they said, do you have the receipt? I said, well, it was a gift. And they said, well, if he has the receipt, it'll be fine. I'm like, okay. So I asked him, of course, because it was a business expense. He had the receipt and he gave me the receipt and they gave me $1,700 for my $50 laptop.
Wow.
Right? I wanted to find the guy who broke in and give it to him, give him $50, say thanks.
Oh
But
my gosh.
but they fixed my window, whatever. But I had, I had sold a business. So it was just after 9/11, right? And so I had a retail store and I had, or no, just before 9/11. So in June of November of 2001, I had sold my business, which was a retail store and healing center. And she bought it. And then 9/11 happened and the business tanked and she tanked on paying me for it. And I had debt that I was paying off from it. So
Right.
I had to go in and declare bankruptcy because she never paid me for the stuff. And I didn't have money coming in at that point because the business had closed in the whole 9 yards. Right. And so here I am, I have no money. And I've got no credit because I had to close all my credit cards because of the bankruptcy. And this break-in happens, and now I've got $1,700, which allowed me to pay off the last of my car, and left $1,000 in my bank account. And now the spirit's like, okay, time to go. And I'm like, go where? They were like, well, you're going to the festival. That'll be good. And I'm like, okay. And so I gave away everything I owned because it was $100 a month for the storage unit, right? And I was like, I'm not paying $100 a month when I'll
Right.
have $1,000. And my unemployment insurance came to a whopping $350 a month because I hadn't been at the job very long. I'd been running a
Yeah.
business before that, right? And so all of this, right? And so just before I was to leave for this trip, I went to one of my students' houses and, picked up her bathroom reading. And it was Lame Deer Seeker of Visions was the book.
Mhm.
And I opened to a random page in the book because I'm want to do that for divination purposes, right? And I opened the page and it says the apprentice shaman just before his final initiation will give away everything he owns.
Ugh.
And I had just scheduled the giveaway, right? And I went, ah, right.
Uh-huh.
So, this was the journey was my shamanic initiation. And I was on the road, or I was unhoused for 6 months and on the road for another 6 months. And I drove 14,000 miles, and I stayed 90% of the time with people I had not met before I left. And so I lived on $350 a month and the kindness of strangers.
What was your emotional state like throughout this?
Oddly calm.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so weird because everybody looked at me and went, "Oh my God, you're so brave." And I was like, "I don't feel brave because I
Yeah.
don't feel scared. I
Oh.
feel completely divinely guided.
Hmm.
I am not." I oddly, the first 6 months had actually gotten me out of my control patterns. It took
Yeah.
me a month of being unemployed to just stop. I'd lay on the couch and every 15 seconds I'd be like, I should be, I should be, I should be, I should be, right?
Yeah.
It took me a month to get over that. But once I got out of that pattern, it was surprising. I had a history of back problems when I was younger, in my 20s, and even before that in my teens. And those just went away when I was on walkabout because I was like, I got no place else to be. I got nothing else to do. I'm just chilling and
Goodness.
cooling. I'm here. And it was stress. The back
Yeah.
problems were stress. Go figure, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And but I'd never known that because I'd never known a life without a massive amount of stress. So
Yeah.
because my mother and I moved every year or two.
Yeah.
So that's stress unto itself.
Right, for sure. So
And
how long did the couch surfing and that journey go on?
the whole thing was almost a full year.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, I left in January of 2001 and I was back in December 20th of 2002. So, yeah, it was a lot. So,
Yeah, I imagine.
yeah.
So, okay, so then, we're at fast forward to 2002. What's going on? How has your life changed and changing at that point?
Yeah, so 2002, I came back to Massachusetts and I stayed with the boyfriend I had picked up along the way. Um, and I stayed with him for like 2 or 3 months until I found a job. I
Mhm.
got a job. I was a real estate trainer. So,
Mhm.
when I was not in the beginning, I became a real estate agent by accident, but it was perfect for me because I'm a transformation person, right? So I help people transition from one state of being to
Right.
the other. Real estate, house
Mhm.
buying, transition, perfect, right? So I went and got a job as a trainer and manager in a real estate office for a year, and then I ended up opening my own company and doing that. Um, and all of these pieces and parts fell into place. I got an apartment, a whole 9 yards. And interestingly, what happened is what they say happens at the end of a giveaway in the shaman world is that, you give away everything you own without expecting that any of it will come back to you. Right.
Mhm.
Well, I got my job as a office manager for a real estate company, and all of my new agents found out that I didn't have any furniture and they all went into their basements
Oh,
and their back rooms and they just gave me furniture and dishes and I was supplied. The only thing I bought was a bed.
yeah,
Everything
yeah.
else was supplied to me and I didn't have to
Wow.
do anything because that was the archetype I had stepped into in order to do this. And so that was a really interesting thing to watch happen. I mean, I had one woman give me a couch and a love seat and another person end tables. And, just the guy I rented from gave me the dining room table and chairs. And I was just, everything was just supplied. It was very interesting to watch.
At what point did you start doing the live coaching and the one-on-ones with people?
Yeah, so I really started that in the real estate world.
Okay.
So, I was doing a lot of coaching in the real estate world, a lot of spiritual coaching in the real estate world. And it was sort of around the edges. I mean, at the end of my real estate sales career, I was actually doing I was talking to people about spiritual stuff. I did my first channeling in a house that I was showing to a couple. I channeled where we had met
Hmm.
before, and was telling them all about stuff. That was the first time I'd ever channeled, was in a house showing them that. I would tell people, this house doesn't have good vibes. You don't want to buy this, or this house even looks lived in. It's empty, and it has been for a while. There's no energy here, and that sort of stuff. I would tell people as we were going through. So I mean, it was not uncommon. And then when my new agents, I was primarily working with the new agents, and so the new agents were going through a lot of transition, a lot of personal transformation, and so I did a lot of spiritual coaching with them. It didn't always language it in a woo woo way, but I
Yeah.
did a lot of spiritual and transformational coaching with them. And ultimately, I did that in my training business as well when I opened that. So I've been doing it. Oh, I don't even know how long, probably mid 90s, right?
Wow.
Because I
Yeah.
was training agents back then too. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, so right around the midnight, I opened the specifically spiritual coaching business in 2006.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting journey, because I remember
Yeah.
in 2005 coming to a networking meeting and saying, I'm a business shaman, and having the whole room go, oh my God, you didn't just say that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. That is
Yeah.
not exactly, you know,
Yeah. It was not done. It wasn't
yeah.
quite social pariah status, but it was really close.
Yeah. So how did that work out? Like,
Well,
did you
it
stick
didn't.
with them? It didn't.
It
It
didn't.
didn't.
It did not go over well. And I was business coaching too at the same time. And so, I was like, I picked up, I was limping along for a long time in this
Uh-huh.
business, because it took a long time for the world to catch up, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And so I did a lot of piddly little things, $25 classes, and
Yeah.
$100 a session, and whatever, right? For a lot of honestly, it was easier to get business doing psychic readings than it was to get business doing spiritual coaching back then.
Yeah.
So, because it was socially acceptable to get a psychic reading, it was not socially acceptable to get a spiritual coach, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
what?
You could do a life coach, but not a
Oh,
spiritual coach, right?
interesting.
Yeah. So it was tough for a while there.
Yeah.
I was right at the poverty line for a long time,
Yeah.
because, well, for one, because it was the culture had not really caught up. And for two, I had a lot of limiting beliefs. I
Yeah.
was like, I was hanging out with a lot of broke people,
Yeah.
and therefore I believed that nobody had any money.
Yeah.
All evidence to the contrary in the world around me, right?
Right. Right.
But I believed nobody had money, and therefore I was being codependent about my pricing, and codependent about what I could charge, and I wasn't packaging myself properly. And
Yeah.
I was saying, oh, it's by the hour rather than by the outcome, and you always make less money when you do that.
Yeah.
And so, all of these things. And I wasn't clear exactly what I did, right? I was still
Yeah.
trying to figure out what my essence was. I had a lot of skills, and that's always been my biggest problem, is that I've got so many different skills. And I hear
Yeah.
this from spiritual teachers and spiritual practitioners a lot, because they're like, oh my gosh, I can do so many things. It's like, yes, but the things you can do are not the outcome that you provide. Right.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to sell people on all the different things that I could do, which I hear from a lot of people. And that was a real limiting problem too, because
Hmm.
people don't care what you do, they care what you can do for them,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
so it took me years to figure out what my essence was.
Hmm.
And initially I was like, oh, well, I carry the energy of change, and I stuck with that idea for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I do carry the energy of change, but it's on a deeper level, I carry the energy of transformation, right?
Okay.
And transformation and change are different.
How?
So change is, I moved from one place to the next. That's change, right?
Okay.
Literally, like physically moved, right?
Okay.
Transformation is, I became a homeowner. I became a parent. It's an identity shift, not a
Okay.
physical shift.
Okay. A little deeper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do identity shift. That's what I do.
Got it. Do you feel like the world has caught up, or are we still catching up with that thought process?
No, I feel like, well, I mean, there's always parts of the world that aren't awake yet,
Of
but
course.
I feel like the mainstream has caught up with us, and that's both good and bad, because now I can talk about what I do, but there's also expectations associated with it. So right now I say I'm a shaman, and people have come to associate shamanism with ayahuasca journeys or plant medicine journeys, right?
Okay.
Which is totally not what I do.
Okay.
And so I have to undo that expectation for people.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the fact of when I was a kid and we were going into this world, if you talked about this stuff, you were literally considered a crackpot, right? And so the only people who were out there in public talking about it were people who were so committed to it that they were willing to be seen as crackpots. They knew their stuff, right? So you knew that if you bought a book or you went out and you did stuff with somebody, you were getting it from somebody who actually had studied and knew what they were talking about. Now there are people out there doing, weekend workshops to become a shaman, which, by the way, you cannot become a shaman in a weekend. Let me just say that out loud. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are people who are reading a book and then putting themselves out as an expert, or there are even worse, there are marketing bros out there who have said, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, I'm going to get my piece. And they go grab aphorisms from 6 different places, throw them together, do not understand them at all, package them up and charge a lot of money for it. And so there's so much misinformation out there right now that I feel really bad for people who are waking up right now, because it is so hard to know who knows what they're talking about.
Do you have a hard time getting clients that are strong in their Christian beliefs?
I'm sorry. Say that
Do you
differently.
have problems getting clients that are strong in Christian beliefs? Will they
Well, I don't target people who are necessarily strong in Christian beliefs, but but I do have Christian clients.
Okay.
So the challenge is what part of Christianity they come from, right?
Okay.
Because Christ was a Gnostic, which means that he studied energetics and magic. That's who he was. And so if you get somebody who comes from a Christian background, usually like the UCC, that sort of thing, that is open to the mystical side of the traditions, then there's no problem, right? But if you come in from the fundamentalist or the, some of the Southern Baptists and things like that, where they're like, this is of the devil, some of the Catholics, or this is of the devil. There is there's a section of Catholicism where they're the little old ladies who read their tarot cards and do their thing. So, it's just there's like different elements of different churches, right? But nothing I say goes against Christianity. Right.
Yeah.
And people will say, oh, well, you worship Satan, because I lived in the South for a little bit and I was out as a shaman, and they were like, oh, you worship Satan. I'm like, not my pantheon. And they're like, what? I'm like, Satan is a Christian construct, right? It's part of the mythology of Christianity. And Satan is part of the whole mythos of Christianity. I'm not Christian. Now, I think Christ was a great teacher, and I believe in a lot of his teachings, but I'm not quote unquote Christian in the church sense, right? And so it would be very difficult for me to worship a god. So Satan is a competing god to God, right? It would be out of context for me to worship somebody that's not in my pantheon, and they just don't. It doesn't compute with their worldview sometimes. But I mean, I have a lot of people who come in from Christian backgrounds. And there's nothing I teach that's I don't teach a religion.
Yeah.
So what I teach is actually unique in the fact that it is out of a religious context. So the only thing that I'm doing is I'm teaching metaphysics, right? I'm teaching the only thing you have to believe in order to work with the stuff that I teach is you have to believe that at our core, we are all one. And that we are a reflection of the divine, that each of us contains a spark of the divine within us, and that we are the divine and the divine is us, right? And that, and this is to a lesser extent, you don't have to believe definitively that there are past lives, but I do teach some about past lives. And the concept of the eternal moment of now. and that everything's happening all at once, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Those are the core concepts. If you can buy into those things, you can learn the stuff that I teach. We don't require that people have any sort of religious hierarchy or structure or dogma
Yeah.
in place in order to work. I'm actually anti-dogma. So, you know,
Okay.
it's yeah. So I have a big picture view, but my real goal is to break down the barriers between all the different silos that you find in the spiritual world and the wellness world and the healing world and the, you know, da 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 da. I try to cross pollinate all of those worlds so that you see a bigger picture, because those don't, they even use different vocabularies. And so it's hard for you to understand that you studied this over here in this place and this over here in that place. And it's like, no, those teachings relate.
Yeah.
They actually
Yeah.
relate, but you don't know that because they're totally different vocabularies, right?
So with all of this and all the things you do, if someone comes to you and says, "What do you do?" and like a quick one, few words, what do you say?
I I put people on the express train to spiritual evolution.
Love it. All right. We could talk forever. We got to wrap up. I appreciate your time. This has been fun. Come back anytime and tell people where they can go to connect with you and hear and learn more about you.
Yeah, so I have a new podcast that just came out called Spirit Guides. And that's on iTunes and Apple Podcasts and pretty much anywhere else. I've also got an older podcast called Spirit Sherpa, which has got 300 and some episodes if you want to do a deep dive. But to reach me direct is kellesparta.com, spelled like you see it on the screen, Kelle. And that tells you all about me.
Great. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I appreciate it very much.
I am
And
thrilled to have been here. Thank you.
thank you. You can follow along at runradio.net and connect over to wherever you get your podcasts and follow along there. Thanks so much.